Hello, friends. This is Alina Holmquist, Accounting Supervisor. I'm going to provide you some information on accounting and budget. Here's what I'm going to cover. I want to let you know that the Account Code Guide has been updated for 2021, and there's a PDF version to make it easier to print out on the Business Services Employee Resources webpage. I've been asked to cover our 29-digit account code structure. You might want to open up the Account Code Guide and follow along. Now, we have 6 funds that we'll talk about on the next slide, but we're just going to cover the general fund, as this is the fund everyone uses. Now, if the section is underlined, that means it's defined by the School District Accounting Manual, and we can't change these pieces. I know it's 29 digits, but don't be intimidated. I'm going to make this easy for you. So we've got the fund, the type, the account, the program, the activity, the object, the location, a miscode, an area that's not used, and the subfund. We primarily live in the green area, and we only need to know the blue sections if we're going to do a code search in the chart of accounts. Here's all of our funds. As I said, we live in the general fund. This is where we have expenditures for our school operations. Capital projects is where we record expenditures for major projects like the high school remodel. Debt service is where we pay for bonds, and ASB is where we have extracurricular activities involving our kiddos. We've got more information about the codes in section 2. It also has 29 digits, but we really just have to know the program and location for ASB. Private purpose trust is where we have scholarships and invest ed, and transportation vehicle is where we buy buses. The expenditure, the type and the GL account code are pretty easy. We live in expenditures which have a type code E and a GL 530. And again, you're only going to need this information when you're looking in the chart of accounts. The revenues have been hard-coded in InTouch. So let's start really with the program codes. Program codes tell us who is paying for this. It identifies the funding source, and we've got lots like state apportionment, federal grants, categorical programs, and of course federal programs, they have more compliance requirements. So those are specifically listed in the account code guide. We also list the budget authority or the person responsible for those program codes, and there's a column for building budget. Now, if it's marked with an X, that means it's a building budget program. It shows up in the building budget expenditure reports. So at the building level, you really only live in a few programs, primarily basic ed and then 7902 for block technology. That makes this part pretty easy. Activity codes, well, they tell us why are we buying this? It identifies the function or the reason. Like, is this for the principal's office? Is this for safety? Is this for health with the nurse? Is it for teaching? Is it for professional development? We have an activity codes document that helps you decide what activity code to use. You can read the definitions and decide. Now, Activity 27 teaching has certainly been abused, and there's probably some better activity codes out there. If you're ever confused, just call for help. I want to cover some of the newer activity codes and make sure that we're using these when we can. Activity 31 is for instructional professional development. That's where you can record the subs when staff's away on PD. You can record staff time there, registration, tuition, and travels. Consider using this with program 0166 that we have for some contractual professional development obligations for our certificated staff. Activity 32, instructional technology, is where we can record the cost of computers and other classroom technology, like document cameras and projectors. Consider using this with program 7902 for block technology. Activity 33, curriculum, that's where we record textbooks, electronic resources, workbooks, and other instructional materials. It also includes instructional software, so the annual license and subscription fees. Object codes, they help us determine what we are buying. It identifies the goods and services. Now there's some definitions to the right of the account code, of the object code in the account code guide. You want to take a look at those to decide, or like I said, give a call if you're confused. The first digit really matters in the object code, and when you're deciding between a couple of codes, it's important just to be consistent. If you've recorded something as a subscription in the past, probably going to be a subscription going forward. So the debit credit transfers are really just used for internal charges, like when we have field trips or catering. We have Object 2 for cert salaries and Object 3 for classified salaries. You'll be using this when you need to code timesheets. There's a code for sub and extra time that you'll probably use. Please be aware that we have 2 codes for subs, one for just general subs, and then a code for subs that we're using because our staff are obtaining professional development. Payroll's going to take care of all the benefit codes. The Object 5 supply codes are pretty easy. There's not very many of them. Please be aware that Object code 5619 is a holding account. That's for budget purposes only. Please don't code any expenditures there. Object 7, purchase services. Now that's where you're going to have to put your thinking cap on and try to choose what's the best code. Object 8 for travel is pretty easy. And Object 9 for capital outlay is pretty easy if you know the parameters. So we're just going to touch on those. So capital outlay is an asset that has a useful life of greater than 1 year and a unit cost of greater than or equal to $5,000. It also includes items that are theft sensitive, that want to grow legs and walk away. In section 6, we list some of those items with some dollar thresholds. It's primarily computers, printers, cameras, and projectors. Now, since the account code guide is available in PDF and Excel, I really recommend cutting the Excel version down to just the codes that you use with your own notes so that you can have a guide just for you. We began some required code conversions in 1819. These were the result of federal and state requirements for detailed and comparable data at the building level. So object codes got changed. We had to use the prescribed NCS codes from the U.S. Department of Education. This is the National Center for Education Statistics. Basically, we ended up with less codes and less options in our object code area. We've posted an object code conversion guide out on the Employee Resources webpage. I just want you to be careful though, because how we did it in the past may not be right. So please do find the correct code to use. The account code guide will also have asterisks next to some of the object codes. That means that it's defined by the school district accounting manual. Basically, it's prescribed. And we need to know this if we're going to use an OSPI valid account code tool. For example, 5610 has an asterisk beside it for general supplies and materials. That means it's one of the prescribed codes that will be listed on the OSPI tool. However, right below it, 5611 for copy paper does not have an asterisk, so it's not going to be listed on the OSPI tool. So what we're doing is in the background, we are mapping 5611 to one of the prescribed codes, 5610. It's all done in the background, but something that you'll need to know if you want to use the tool. Location codes. So this tells us where, what location or building or students are benefiting. The state and feds want to know our spending at the per student level. If we don't code expenditures to a building, they will allocate those expenditures. And we prefer to code these costs when possible. Now, we had some changes to the location codes as part of the conversion. It expanded from 3 to 4 digits, and the state actually wanted us to use the CEDAR enrollment building codes from OSPI. Now, we weren't familiar with those. We didn't want to get people confused. So we decided to maintain the location codes that we were familiar with and add a digit on the end. And what we're doing is we're mapping the location codes to the CEDAR building codes in the background. Now, because we have to identify things down to the building level, we didn't want to mess up our building budget reports. So we've decided to use LLL0 for building budgets and LLL1 for district budgets. Now, if you're in a building, you're really only going to know the LLL0. That's what you've been using. But other programs, and especially human resources, we started using the LLL1 to get costs identified to a building without disturbing a building budget. Now, there's other location codes that exist for admin purposes and for billing purposes. MIS codes. These are really limited use. We built a lot of these out for CTE classes so we could track those expenditures. However, if you do have a specific expenditure that you want to track, we can add a generic building code on there. Maybe you have a donation that you want to track the expenditures, and we could use it for this. There are some newer MIS codes I want to make you aware of that you probably will encounter. The 8000 federal COVID-19 MIS code is where we code costs above and beyond our normal operations as a result of the pandemic. Because this is federal, we also want to be careful what we code there. You will encounter MIS code 9410 for copier and lease contracts. That's used in conjunction with object code 7442. Same for MIS code 9411 for copier overage. That's also used with object code 7442, and we will put POs in for the copier costs. Subfund. You won't do much with this, but I want to make you aware of why it exists. So again, there was some legislative action that required the subfund for enrichment, revenues, and expenditures. Basically, the legislature wants to know how we use our levy dollars. And so we have a subfund 0 for state expenditures and 1 for local expenditures. Now the revenue side is hard-coded and in touch, and the expenditures is where you will see the 1 or the 0. Please continue to use the 0 at the end of expenditures. Don't select the account code with subfund 1. The final phase of our long code conversion was to validate the account code combinations. With all these prescribed codes, object codes, location codes, subfund, we also got a new list of valid code combinations. Well, when we did the validate, we had many errors. So we spent some time merging the history and inactivating invalid account codes. If you're trying to use an account code that you've used before and it doesn't exist, we probably had to inactivate it. There were problems with activity codes used with object codes, primarily object code 7352, other technical services, and object code 9734, technical equipment and infrastructure. Most of the time, we need to use activity 32, instructional technology, with these. Now, to prevent invalid account codes, we've got some notes next to the object codes for valid activity codes in the account code guide. Look for these. We've also got the OSPI valid account code tool out on the employee resources. This is where you'll need to know the asterisks or the required object codes to be able to do some filters to see what are valid activity codes to use with those object codes. Enough about account codes. Let's talk about budget expenditure reports. The first thing we want to talk about is timing. So by the end of the month, the majority of expenditures have been posted in the system. We do 2 AP runs a month that align to the board meetings, which are the second and fourth Wednesday of the month. And of course, payroll happens at the end of the month. Now, you can run reports at any time. You just need to know that you might not have all of the expenditures in until we actually close the month. I don't close the month until the second board meeting of the month. We need time to receive and reconcile the county treasurer's report, process internal and external billings, make corrections, and do budget adjustments. So monthly reports are posted to your Google Budget folder. I will post a preliminary report the first week of the month. After the second board meeting of the month, I will post the final reports. Our fiscal year ends August 31. However, we don't close the fiscal year until around October 25th. As you can imagine, it takes a lot longer to close August, September, and October and create budget expenditure reports. Now, your preliminary budgets for the school year will be available in late September. Typically, the amount for your budget is going to be close to what you had in the prior year. Final budgets aren't available until late October. These are based on October 1 enrollment, and we also need to have the fiscal year closed for the carryover amount and the fines and fees revenues that get added to your budget. We also do budget adjustments throughout the year. This is done through budget transfers or donations that are received. Now, we have forms for both, and we would prefer that those are submitted with the principal's approval. If I receive a budget transfer request form, then I will post these monthly, and that just basically redistributes your budget. I would love to get this process automated. If you submit a gifts and donation request form, I'm going to process that as soon as possible. However, if I don't get anything from you, I will look at your revenues quarterly and default the increase to your 5619 holding account. Because when you receive donations, gifts, commissions, or other revenue, this actually increases your budget. On your Google Budget folder, you're also going to find a building budget reconciliation. It's called a BBR. And this basically gets you from your original budget to your revised budget that you see on your budget expenditure reports. And primarily those changes come from the donations. Now, you have access to run the same reports that I run each month at any time. I just provide reports so that you can reconcile and know we match. Sometimes code access changes the results, so it's important to reconcile every once in a while to see that we are still in agreement. You can find your budgetary data mining reports under Skyward Financial Management, Account Management Reporting. There's a section for budgetary data mining. If you don't want to run a report to get some details, you can use the full account code to look at transactions through the chart of accounts, and I have that highlighted. Again, you're going to need to type in the full account code, so the blue and the green sections of the account code structure, in the field on the bottom right to search for that activity. So here's a list of all of the general fund building budget reports that I've created and cloned to the business secretaries. There's a building expenditure report that provides a summary of the building budget and expenditures, and that is run for a select month. There's a building expenditure detail report that provides the details of building expenditures, and that's run for a select date range. And again, if you want our fiscal year, it's going to be from September 1 to October 31. There's also a budget expenditure history report that provides a 3-year summary of building expenditures. You can run that for a select month. You can also run it in Excel to create a budget worksheet for analysis and revisions. So once your building budget for the year has been updated, you can use this report to create budget transfers or know what budget transfers you want to do. Also, any of these reports can be cloned and modified for other purposes. So please do let me know if you have questions or you need help with anything. I'm here for you, and thank you very much.